Fabulous. We are now being recorded. This is fantastic. Oh, hello, everyone. My name's John Oliver, counselor from Ward 1. We are here as the Rules Subcommittee, as an extension of the Programs and Services Committee. I am joined in the room by Counselor Humphrey and online by member of the subcommittee, Baker. We're also joined by Counselor Maliki, who is not a member of the committee, but always welcome. Tonight, and I should also say we are being audio and video recorded. We have 4 items in front of us tonight that I would like to discuss. A couple of them I think are more or less wrap-up items. I did receive a phone call just as I was coming in the building from Councilor Krinsman. He's going to be a couple of minutes late and asked me to take up the budget review process once he got here. So we'll kind of bump that one down the list. And I'll take up the second item first, which is listed as the committee meeting schedule, wherein we were considering shifting the time and or days around for the various committee meetings. Up until this point, I think we've brought it up twice within the subcommittee. There has been very little appetite to go to the lengths that I think we would need to make significant adjustments there. But there is one thing that came up during the budget review process that I was asked to dig into, so I started to, and that is, why are school committee and city council meetings pretty much designed to be at the exact same time on the exact same nights, first and third Mondays of every month? And I started an email conversation with former city council presidents, former school committee chairs, and basically now that I've made this a really long story, the outcome there is we're gonna try and see if we can either alternate some of those schedules or design a few of those meetings, maybe 2 a year, to be joint meetings for the sake of keeping in touch with each other, being able to share information in a more formal basis and a regular basis as well. So right now, I think the next step is really to have a conversation with the school committee chair. Chair Bresky was on that thread. So we're going to kind of take that direction on that particular item. So that will come back at least one more time. We are now being joined by Councilor Baker in the room. Welcome, sir. Welcome.
One ear and then the other. I just have to figure out how to turn this gadget off.
No worries. It's not causing feedback, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, by all means.
Councilor Greenberg had also brought up the question just before the meeting, and I did discuss it with her for a while. So
Same topic, same question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, because I had some initial thoughts on it. I'm sure that Councilor Baker and some of the other folks you've talked to have insights into the history of where meetings end up on which days, that kind of thing. But fundamentally, if we were to do some sort of change there, I would lean more in the direction of what you just mentioned of maybe a couple of times a year at the most is when it needs to be lined up, because otherwise, we're very distinct branches of government under state law, I think. And I think that's the perspective that the state has set up for municipalities. And although there are definitely members of the council who have a private personal interest in the school stuff, especially if they're parents or if they're just curious about it, that's not necessarily germane to our work as a body. And so I was a little bit at a loss as to what the rationale would be for particularly close engagement or making sure that we can definitely always go to their meetings or something like that, because I couldn't figure out what that would be for most of the time.
Understood, yeah.
And then also, just as a practical matter, you know, we do use 4 Mondays a month and 2/3 of us are in committee on Monday. So even if you moved it, the full council to the opposite Mondays of what we have now, there would still be a conflict for most people, so.
2/3, yes. Correct, correct. Yes, sir.
So, I concur with, Councilor Humphrey, you know, we do have some fifth Mondays on the calendar, which are sort of free time, so to speak, is or recess or whatever you want to use as a metaphor.
So let's get rid of that free time.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
but it does occur to me that if you wanted to follow the suggestion of having an opportunity for a joint meeting, a fifth Monday occasionally would do the job
agreed.
and not put everybody out of shape for trying to do something otherwise. It just seems to me that that's occasional joint meetings so everybody sort of hear what each other are doing. But I concur, they really are very different universes. And the school committee is by law and policy and by inclination, not very much disposed to listen to what we have to say about how they spend their money. And we're not very eager to have them tell us what we should be doing. So I think fellowship is great, but beyond that, I'm not sure I would spend a lot of time on this one.
And I have certainly received the pointed feedback in the past that we should mind our own business. And whether or not I agree with that personally, that is the feedback that I have heard. So, you know.
Yep. And I do think that there is certainly a mindfulness of what I'm gonna call swim lanes without a doubt. But I do think it's also important to understand where those swim lanes are, how we're doing in terms of, I mean, at the end of the day, as much as I agree with separate branches, separate governing bodies, different topics, different agendas, couldn't agree more. Once a year, they come together, and over the past couple of years, they've kind of collided, right, in terms of our favorite budget topic. So I'm inclined to lean towards the, you know, twice a year is probably appropriate. Just literally to, how are things going? How are you tracking? What's going, like, are you guys making progress towards the goals you've got? Like, it's good to hear that. Even as a city councilor, you know, I might fall into one of the categories that Councilor Humphrey just talked about. I'm interested, I'm concerned, I want to know so that I can talk to these issues, because 20 some odd %-ish, right?
And
Of our.
I don't know if you need a rules change either to do it, because you could just ask the president to call a special meeting jointly with the school committee for one of those
Good
nights.
point.
And it might not be a fifth Monday. I'm just using that as an example of a time we occasionally are available or theoretically available. But if people know in advance when it is, then you can schedule around it a little bit.
Yep,
But-
that's actually
But not require rules change to do it.
right. It might not be rule worthy.
Yeah.
Agreed. But anyway, just to kind of, just in the interest of time, because I know we have a 7 o'clock meeting across the hall. I do know that the conversation has started, and you know, opinions are flying around, which is great. Ultimately, I think, you know, as kind of part of the rules discussion, maybe the first topic is, regardless of where we land, is this a rule? Or is this something we would just organically ask the president of the council and the school committee chair to organize on a regular or irregular basis?
I guess my instinct would be to just say, as part of the rules report, that this is a recommendation of the president, whoever it is. And,
Correct.
you know, 7 members of the council can always call a meeting as well. It's not like it's the only vehicle we got. So I think that, but the problem is, if you put it into the rule, then you have a conflict, and then you've got to figure out what to do, you know, cancel the analysis.
Fair point. Anything to add to that, Councilor Maliki? I haven't seen a hand go up, but I'm just making sure.
I was muted and I couldn't unmute.
I fixed,
Oh, you
yeah,
fixed it?
yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, we got that.
I've been eating my dinner, so I don't want you to have to watch me eat.
Okay, great, thank you. All right.
And
so,
to your previous topic, I would just say bandwidth is an issue too.
I'm sorry,
And
one
bandwidth is an issue too.
bandwidth is always, yeah, agreed. I'm not quite sure this would, it would be meeting time for sure, but I don't anticipate counselors would be taking away to-dos from this, but point well taken. All right, so the next topic on our list, and by the way, I don't know if you heard this, Councilor Baker, but I'm gonna hold the budget review process until
So
Josh is
Councilor Christie,
great.
heard that.
Great. So the next topic is the committee workload / department assignments by city council committees. Again, here, I think we've had this on our agenda 3 times now. As of right now, there's only one minor shift in responsibilities, and that is to consolidate all the auto licensing with PS&T. I think that's coming off of PF.
Land use.
I believe, is it land use?
Yeah.
Was it land use? Going over to PS&T. Everything else that we've discussed, I think, in particular, the sustainability topics. As of right now, we just don't feel like there's a preponderance of content there to make any changes around. So unless something else comes up, I'm gonna kind of consider that one closed for now. Definitely part of what we'll report out, but
Yeah, I guess the question is, do we want to leave it as a potential thing to come back to later in the year? If we have sudden burst of inspiration over the summer about here's how we should reorganize this, I don't know.
sure. And to my knowledge, all of these items can be brought up again. There isn't a thou shalt not.
Well, ultimately, for a subcommittee, we generally report back to the full committee, so if there's
Right.
some brilliant idea to come up with.
True too. True too. I'm hoping we can do that meeting in early September and then well, this group in early September, PNS middle to maybe the second meeting, and then October for the full council. That's my hope.
Yeah, I guess the other challenge here, because we had talked specifically about environmental type issues, and where to put those. You know, we just had a short-lived proposal for a new department.
Correct.
And then that didn't end up happening, and then we're gonna have a new mayor. So yeah, it's possible that the council, I won't be there, will want to do something next year, but we don't know what that's gonna look like.
Exactly.
Because we don't know what the department situation is gonna be. Yeah.
Right. And I know that, one of the, like tonight, after tonight's conversation with ZAP and PF, we're getting an update on the climate action plan. We're talking about residential BERTA. We're talking about basically sustainability actions that the city has taken. There might be something that comes of that perhaps as well, because I do know that there's also a conversation with, is it EPU scheduled for June 18th? I think that's, yeah. Actually, I don't know if that was DPU or the utilities, now that I think about it.
Oh,
DPW, no?
No,
Or
it's.
no,
Eversource
unless
and
you-
National Grid.
Like National Grid.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
big,
National Grid, I'm sorry,
yeah,
yeah.
National Grid Eversource, right?
Right, sorry.
Okay, I forget who's on the agenda there, but so as of now, that's kind of where I'm holding that one, other than the licensing issues. So that to me seems like all fine and dandy. We have one new item, the timely address of docketed items that my apologies, we're gonna have to get this to everybody online as well. I just,
Plus, we're kind of just at a first draft.
yeah,
stage on
it's very early.
Thinking this through.
Yep, so you wanna take us through
Yeah,
it?
so basically, this is one that I think the public has brought up, and certainly I think counselors at various times have been frustrated about, which is that the chairs have almost total power over whether or not something gets scheduled at all, whether it's for a discussion, whether it's for a vote. And you could have a situation where you docket something at the beginning of the term and 2 years goes by, it never gets on the agenda, it never gets voted out of committee. Maybe the committee is not representative of the full opinion of the council, whatever it may be. And this is something that, you know, like the US House of Representatives, for example, has a process by which if something is languishing in committee and you get a majority of the House to sign a letter saying it has to be released from committee, then it has to be released from committee. And you could either have it go to a committee of the whole to be dealt with if you felt there was more work needed, or you could just say, no, let's just bypass it and go directly to full council vote, depending on how you wanted to structure this. So again, I don't know exactly how we'd want to do this. I think we'd obviously have to make some exceptions with regard to land use, potentially even zoning and planning, although that there's a wide range of things in zoning and planning, obviously. So I don't know about a blanket thing, but you know, and I want to allow an appropriate amount of time for the chairs to deal with things, but you know, I don't want it to get so completely dragged out that it's just not dealt with. And I do think the chairs have been given a pretty huge amount of power on this one aspect that nobody has any ability to do anything about, even if the majority of the council is not happy with how it's being handled. So, you know, I think there's different ways to do it, but I would argue that this is something we should probably think about trying to address. And as I mentioned to you, I think in most cases, just having something written would avoid the problem. You would not need to get it released to the full council or send it to committee of the whole, because the chair would find that to be an onerous situation and they would probably rather just schedule it and deal with it. And I think, you know, that was on my mind. And then the other aspect of it that I think is a similar one is there have been several situations where a committee has labored over something, put all this work into it, voted it out to the full council, and then it turns out that the full council is not in alignment with how the thing was written. And then there's the whole thing about, well, committee work should really be done in committee. And it's like, well, yeah, but also the council has to agree to it. And you don't want to have it be a waste that the committee did all this work. So, you know, I do think there may be situations where, I don't know if having all of the thing get trapped in a particular committee is the way to handle it, but that might be a slightly separate issue. But I think the timeliness thing is particularly on my mind. And again, I think this is one where the public has raised this, not just counselors.
I would agree with that. I've heard that a couple of times myself. Any thoughts, comments?
I guess I haven't seen this be a problem in the sense of anybody, certainly in our committee, I don't think anyone's come to us and said, I've got my item languishing and where is it? At least I, you know, we're, and, you know, and I can't recall a situation frankly where we've had that for a while. Maybe someone else can, but I do think there is a procedure. I'm trying to find it where we have a provision about items being taken up within a certain period of time in the rules somewhere. And I'm just trying to find it because I'm trying to remember.
I believe I saw a line in there that didn't have a timeline to it. I think there's a comment in there, shall make every effort to kind of a reference.
I mean, there's definitely been, I can think of at least one specific item of something that I filed that never had a meeting at all. Not even once.
In which committee? Not mine.
In programs and services.
Oh.
And I would imagine that maybe some of the folks who were very involved with the tree ordinance felt that some things were moving a little slow on that for a while. Yes, we eventually got that done and dealt with, but there was a long time there where nothing was happening. And, you know, I think again, I don't necessarily need it to be that in every case, it's a very rigid timeline, but there needs to be some sort of, or I think there needs to be some sort of safety valve so that, you know, something doesn't get stuck. Because that's the other thing, right? If you have 5 members of a committee that are against a particular docket item, but they also just don't want to vote it out to the full council, they can just keep hold, right?
Yep.
So that's not helpful either.
So do you think that, sorry, Councilor Maliki, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if Counselor Baker has trouble remembering last term in ZAP and talk to Pam about not getting things heard.
Yeah, I think that ZAP, well, yeah, ZAP got stuck last term on VCOD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did, what
And
about,
understandably so, I think, for.
did the,
majority.
did the item about, there was some sort of item about flooding related to, was it, maybe it was related to the retaining walls or something like that? You know, now it's an item that got filed, and I don't think that ever came up for
Correct,
even a meeting, let alone a vote in ZAP last term.
agreed. Yep, I
So,
think you're right. I remember trees was, people were concerned that it just wasn't getting the airtime for a long time, and then when it did, it consumed a lot of the air in the room. But that happens. That to me isn't the
I guess,
point, I think.
again, whether this is an issue that's strong enough to require rules change. I mean, there may be a few situations, but at least I can say, I'm looking at our planning, we move things, for example, there's nothing that's hanging out the things we're holding off because people have said the planning department's not ready, you know.
sure.
But maybe this is another committee, so as you say, maybe furthers and services and that's not, care, so. I don't know the planning process.
I guess the way I would frame the question here to be answered is, should it be the case? Should it be the case that a chair of a committee has the complete and final authority over whether or not something gets brought to a vote in their committee? Because that's the system that currently exists under the rules now. That there's no, and again, I think in most cases, if you had a rule, then it would correct itself because they don't want to have that rule invoked. So they would say, okay, we're gonna take this up. This is the timeline, right? And they might even be able to persuade them to wait and say, here's what, that we're waiting on this department, but I promise you, we're gonna take it up in such and such month, something like that. But if you don't have anything written down at all, I think it becomes very easy for a single counselor who happens to be the chair of a committee to say, I don't want this to come up.
No, I guess I'm less enthusiastic about this one, but and part of it, I think there's a discharge opportunity under the rules. I'm still trying to find the one about having trouble finding the rules on the website. But I'll do that in a minute. But my experience is, at least, I haven't had anybody grumble at me about it, but that's the committee that I am the chair of that. But as you point out, you may have had experience independent of mine. The one thing that I am a little nervous about is that right now docket items generally come through the council. Councilors think of something. No, there's nothing that limits the docket items to the council, and I'm a little nervous about, if somebody wants a public hearing on that, and they can go through that petition process.
Mhm.
But I'm a little uneasy about just having stuff appear on our agenda that then has to be dealt with in committee, which might not be the best use of time. So,
And you can certainly specify that it's a docketed item from, the mayor or a counselor.
Mm.
Cause I agree, I don't want, if somebody's just randomly filing from the public a docket item. That's,
And again, it's not so much that the public is docketing the item, but it could end up being an item that would require 10 meetings, right?
well, staff.
Well, and staff time and, yes, like the whole, like the resource drain is a bit of a question mark in my mind. But it doesn't preclude the committee from taking it up, discussing how to perhaps break it down and tackle said item. Or whether or not to even take it up, but to NAN it. That's on the table at all times, I believe.
Here's the language that I was looking for. It shall be the duty of any committee to whom a subject may be specifically referred to take an item up and report thereon within 1 year from the time said subject is referred to it or asked for further time. no committee or hence council action approved, denied, no action necessary may be taken without a discussion with the primary docket. So we do have, now, this may be honored more than breach than the observance, so, but there is a rule that we do have, some, you know, value.
All right, well, it does seem to me that there are at least a couple of questions that we should pose to departments, department heads, so to speak, in terms of, do we think that there is a reasonable expectation on behalf of the administration / department heads that, bigger ticket items just simply take longer? Should we not put a cap on how long, because like the rules currently say, you have a year really to dispose of an item. What if we modified that, or is it enough to modify that to read, you've got X amount of days, months, meetings, whatever, to at least hear the item once? Because we have done that in ZAP. Like, you've been very good in terms of the, let's get some scope on this. Let's help the let's help the planning department understand the pieces that might be involved here. And that could theoretically satisfy at least starting on an item.
Well, the one other vehicle that may be helpful to Councilor Humphrey's objective rather is that there is the provision that has, again, if you have the rules, let me just burn back, about the president having committees meet, the chairs meetings. We've done that in the past, where that has been a way of dealing with some of the, the president may at the start of the term convene the chairs of the committees for the purpose of establishing certain standards for the management of committee business. So, this whole section offers a window for and a conversation actually with anybody who's running for president to have a conversation about that issue too. So it's not, but I understand. I would like to know what our rule on Robert's rules is, and I can't find it without looking it up online. I think about a discharge petition. I think I'm trying to think back. I don't literally recall a single item where, now there may be something that wasn't taken up, but there was something where the council as a whole was very uneasy about not taking up something. There may have been a specific council that was, but that's my memory. That's not present.
I think, to me, it seems reasonable that if you had 13 counselors who are ready to take up something in full council after some period of defined time has elapsed since it was filed, I just don't understand why a committee chair alone would be able to prevent that, or should be able to prevent that.
I have a vague memory, and again, I need to check it, about the open meeting law talking about the conduct of meetings. Now, maybe that doesn't count on the agenda, but there's a whole process but it's not necessarily decisive. I need to do a little more homework before I find it.
All right. So I think, at this point, I do have a couple, there's obviously a few follow-ups that we should talk about. And we can continue to kick it around a little bit here. I'm inclined to rather agree with Councilor Humphrey. It does seem to me that, the language could be, if after 120 days, insert better number there. If a particular docket item that comes from the council or the administration is not taken up by the assigned committee, 13 city councilors have the ability to force it out of committee, and committee of the whole or full council is kind of something we could consider. But it does seem to me that the point you're making that resonates with me is one counselor shouldn't be able to trump a majority saying, look, we up or down, let's hear this item and move it out. I think that's reasonable. But I do, like, for me, it's hearing it, not perhaps voting it out. Just because some of these things might be bigger than a bread box, and if it is bigger than a bread box, then you have a departmental and resource question. But if it's a smaller item and it's coming behind two really big, like, topics that are gonna take a lot of those resources, then it would be pretty easy to hear it and at least scope it out. But I would hate to have to force it in front of something that's, I don't know, a big ticket item, and then maybe you're just relying on the wisdom of the committee to make that call.
The alternative is a discharge petition, and I just don't want to say it's applicable in our context, but it's in just reading about it as part of what goes on in the House to avoid precisely the problem complained about House Representatives. And there may be a similar mechanism for local government. I'm not doctrinaire about this. I think there's some merit to what you both have said. I'd just like to know a little more about what the current environment contains and whether some conversation with the president, best practices and that sort of thing is an alternative. I think the point is that rules are sort of, while we're the rules committee, we want to make sure that there are rules that are needed and useful, even if they're not.
Understood.
When you were the council president, did you ever have a chair tell you flat out, I'm not taking up that item?
No.
That is something that happened a couple terms ago, as I understand it from, yeah,
Not on my watch anyway.
yes. So I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think there is an issue that needs to be addressed here.
Interesting. And I do believe the president does have the ability to move the item, right?
Not by itself.
Not move it as in vote it, but take it from one committee, move to another?
No, and then once it's assigned, it has to be voted by the council
It
in
does.
October.
Okay.
The one countervailing argument is that, at least because I've been the chair recently and haven't been the chair for a while, but one of the responsibilities of the chair, and it is a judgment call at times, is where and how we spend our time. And I think that part of the difficulty that an item may pose, it may be a perfectly interesting and valid item, but it's a time sink compared to other things.
Yeah.
And but again, I know that's why I like the discharge petition itself, because that's a way of pulling something out rather than having it come out automatically. But that may be that may be the equivalent of the, I don't want to say nuclear option, but a bigger option than you want to go to.
Yeah, I mean, discharge petition was the basis of my idea in the first place, so I'm fine with that being the system if that's open meeting law compliant.
I'm glad that I just need a little time to think about this one because
Perfectly understandable. And just out of curiosity, the situation that you are referring to, committee chair goes to the president, says, I'm not going to take this item up. Did the president do anything?
Well,
I'm just curious.
what would the president do? Because the president, I don't think the president is able to remove chairs in the middle of the term. Is that correct? Or is well, anyway, apparently that didn't rise to that level, and I
Okay.
guess that's not surprising. But
Right.
anyway, yeah, I don't know. I
Fair
think,
enough, but.
you know, yeah. And yeah, it's I think one of the other things that I had sort of thought of, and we have it noted here, is if you were to do something along the lines of a discharge petition, I think the majority should include the lead docketer, which is consistent with the language we already have in terms of consulting the lead docketer, that kind of
I
thing.
would agree with that. I mean, because
Yeah.
the docketer really is the, give some agency to that role.
All right, well, we'll do some, what I'm hearing is we need to do a little bit of homework on the discharge petition. Make sure that it's OML compliant, which if it's. Well, if
If it's not strictly, there's probably a way of coming up with an alternative type of thing.
Yeah. I would imagine that, and then the other thing that we should consider is whether or not this is in and of itself a rule, or do we want to modify what's in here? Or just make it a recommendation to the president has this ability.
I mean, there are the standards, although we haven't looked at them very often, the standards for the conduct of committees. And I can't even remember whether that's in there, but it's worth a check. I appreciate Councilor Hunter's initiative on this, because I think the point is that, you try and get all the business done and somebody who's sitting on something just to be ornery is annoying.
I think
Well, and it
annoying
may or
is-
may not be ornery, right? It could be that they personally object to it, or alternatively, it could be that they, for whatever reason, don't want the council on record voting on that issue.
Yeah.
Because they're not sure how it's gonna go and it's gonna make people mad either way, you know?
Well, that's an argument for being cautious about
Well-
adopting the rule.
Yeah,
I just think that it shouldn't. I always tend to err on the side of it should be very unusual for one person to be able to override the will of the majority. That should be only, you know, certain special circumstances.
Yep, all right,
Let's hold on to this one and do one.
I agree. Last item is is how the city council goes through and conducts our business in reviewing the annual city budget. I'm hoping that Councilor Krinsman can join us here, because this was something that he was instrumental in bringing forward. But I believe, we've talked about this twice already, or at least once. And I believe that everyone was basically of the mind that what we have in place today primarily should stay the way it is. The area that I think people were leaning towards changing is, or was, the ability for counselors through just a written request. Hey, it would be fantastic if Department X could talk about this situation over here. I'm very curious about that, how that impacts the budget, if you're going to be assigning resources to it this year, that sort of thing. And we did a little bit of that this year in ZAP. And I think people were generally, at least in the subcommittee, in favor of doing that again. But you had a comment?
Yeah, I guess my question is that the budget has, as we've seen, has sort of two dimensions in the discussion. One is, what are you spending your money on? What are your priorities and all of that? But it also becomes sort of a general question time about things people have on their minds. And part of the challenge of this is because we really do want to encourage all the counselors to participate. So I guess the question I would have is, when the budget has such presumptive power, in other words, we can only cut it rather than doing anything else to it. How is there anything in the rules or practices that would make it less time consuming for everybody?
Well, that is the second item and something I wanted to bring up tonight, because I don't think it was on the list, but I don't think we had a chance. Can we let Councilor Krinsman? Great.
Maybe you can eliminate this.
Councilor Krinsman, how are you, sir? There he is.
There
Can
he
you
is.
hear us?
Hi, sorry.
There he is. Nope, quite all right. We're just coming into the budget review process now.
Great.
Yep, so your timing is impeccable. Basically, just a quick recap. My understanding or review of our last conversation on this item was, with one exception, the last time we took this up, we wanted to leave everything in place, with the exception of allowing city councilors to forward, specific requests to be addressed by the department heads in their presentation. Right? I think that worked quite well in ZAP. I think we were able to get through a lot of information really quickly. We got the topics that people, at least for the most part, had on their minds covered, which was great. And I think really the other part of the conversation that I'd like us to at least start tonight is, and Councilor Baker just brought this up, how do we also kind of self-govern, right, on the city council side, how do we focus our attention, our questions, and the amount of time we spend with each department's budget, making sure that the questions that we're queuing up and asking are obviously budget related, because I think it's fair to say that every question we ask could be at least indirectly or tangentially related to a budget. But I think really the intent of these meetings, right, the budget meetings, is to really focus in on what the department's highlighting, what their focal point is going to be for the upcoming year. How are they allocating resources, whether that's budget and or personnel. So from my perspective, it does seem to me that those two things could play off of each other very well. If we were to say, for example, let's set a target, and Josh, I believe you did this as well in programs and services. You set kind of a target for how many slides and or minutes each presentation should take. Loosely, is that a fair statement?
I definitely set a target for the one that I.
You said, okay,
Yeah.
but for
I
the
did-
presentation?
I did the first one. Yeah, so
Yeah, okay,
the way that I structured it was I emailed the department heads in advance, I think at least a week ahead to give
Okay.
them plenty of time.
Yep.
And I said, for each department, please limit it to, and then I gave them a range of minutes. So I think I said 10 to 15 for the smaller departments. And then I said for Parks and Rec, which is one of the big ones, I
Yep.
said, 25 to 35, 25 to 30, something like that,
okay,
right?
all right,
And I also said in that guidance to them, please focus your remarks on areas of major change, areas that maybe look like a change on paper, but actually it's just an accounting issue that we moved it to a different department or something like that, because that's inevitably a question that comes up when people are looking through. And then I think this goes to Councilor Baker's point about the issue of what's on people's minds. So this year I said, if your department is potentially being affected by the federal cuts, let us know what's going on with that, because that is obviously going to be a question on people's minds. And I think every department head got back to me pretty quickly and said, great, I will limit my presentation to that length. Thank you for the guidance on this, etc. I also did spell out in my email to them, again, if you're just going over your objectives for the year, that is written out. So you don't actually need to give that in the presentation. So try to make it something that's beyond what's in the presentation if possible. And then I also did instruct the counselors to limit themselves to one question at a time initially, and then we would go back around on the basis that usually people have overlapping questions, so it's good to let other people get a hand on the ball and you don't have to be the one asking every question. And B, I think that avoids the cross-examination style approach where you're asking them a series of 10 questions like it's a courtroom with a witness. And it's like, just pick what the actual question is about. We don't need to hear a whole long preamble, and we don't need to hear 10 questions in a row leading up to your important question. And it seemed like that system worked. And we got done relatively quickly and everyone seemed happy, I think. So that's how I did it. And so I do think some of that is less about rules and more about just having the president create clear instructions, so that hopefully the chairs are running the meetings in a consistent way. But that was me trying that out.
I'd be interested to hear Councilor Crispin's take, but I have a comment that I hope you will not just allow this report, but maybe memorialize what you did. Because I thought it was useful and effective technique, and again, having that as an example for somebody to refer to in the future, even if you're not here, would be a good idea.
Agreed.
I'm
Councilor-
invaluable.
Your input is invaluable as well. Councilor Krinsman, thoughts?
I couldn't hear everything that Councilor Baker said, but it's interesting because I did not do what Counselor Humphrey did. I had thoughts of doing what Counselor Humphrey did, but for some reason didn't sort of implement this year. And I actually think all of what Counselor Humphrey did makes complete sense. Like that is exactly the direction I'm headed in. I also would like to see us limit the number of nights that we're doing this. I think we spend many, many nights doing this. And if we're able to limit both each department's presentation, we can in turn limit the number of nights that we're all doing this and both put other council business on hold and just spin our wheels with, like Councilor Humphrey said, the cross-examination of a constituent issue as opposed to questions about the budget.
Yeah, and just so you know, by my count, we spend 12 to 14 nights over the course of that 6 or 7 weeks, whatever that total time frame is. That is, by the way, you know, that's inclusive of the mayor's initial presentation, all the way through possibly 3 nights of deliberation by the council. It includes the, you know, the night that we talk about CIP and water sewer rates. So I mean, it's everything. And by the way, not everyone is involved in every night because you're only on two committees, not all.
I think there's sort of, if I can offer a little historical perspective, while this seems onerous, I can testify from experience, it is light years improved over many years ago, where literally the big budget book we had, the chair of finance would say, all right, we're starting on page 1. And literally we would go page by page through this thing. It was a most tedious exercise. And so we have at least moved off of that. I will say that there's a process, Councilor Krensman, I was endorsing basically what you were saying for Councilor Humphrey to memorialize what he did in some way that we can sort of have it as an example. But I think the other issue is just the nights that are set aside. Historically, when I was president, we worked at trying to make sure that big departments where people might have an idea, want to have some input, like police and fire is one night, and public works is another night. The school budget is one night. You know, so that even though you're not on the committee, the members of the council were encouraged to come so that we didn't redo those same things in the committee of the whole. And I think that process has actually proved very successful because we haven't, there were times in the past where when we had those meetings that conflicted with each other, people who could have and should have attended didn't, and then they sort of replayed the same questions in the full committee of the whole, and we spent more time on it. But at least there's a presumption that if you're interested in the subject, show up at the committee level, don't save it for committee of the whole. And I think that is maybe marbled into the schedule a little bit. It's not explicit, but I think it's an important aspect. But I think the more work that can be pushed into the committee conversations and then organize those, the less time we have to spend in committee of the whole and really deal with the resolutions. Even the process of reporting, we do that. I think it's probably good for the public to understand because they don't watch all of the committee meetings, but even those reports are at least shorter than they used to be in terms of the oral part. I mean, the written part can carry a lot of baggage.
Well, in my opinion, the written report should be where the water is being carried, and the verbal or the oral report is a summary of, like, a quick summary of what was written, just as a reminder for the rest of the council. Hey, we did talk about A, B, and C, and I think we did a pretty good job this, because it's fresh in my mind. I was paying attention because of this item. People, for the most part, went very top line. I think there were 2 or 3 departments where the comment was, yes, and the written report is available to you in your packet. And that was it. We met on such and so a night. And to me, I think that makes sense.
Well,
because in front of
I think what you're basically pointing out, if I can just, is the more we move to kind of a first call model, the more efficient it will be. In other words, if there's something you really want to talk about, then, but the committee report should almost stand on its own. The only reason I'm a little cautious about that is just because the public doesn't know the ins and outs of the budget. The mayor makes a general presentation, but I do think that it's sometimes helpful. But again, you're not going to get an argument out of me about spending less nights here on an item that really we do not end up influencing very much.
And ultimately, I think that that's top of mind for most, if not all, counselors these days. Is that really it's the, you know, we spend all this time, effort, energy going through a process where I would argue that yes, we have been able to kind of, you know, impose our will, if you want to call it that way, or call it that, a little bit over the past couple of years. But it certainly is not at the level of detail that we go through department by department.
I don't know if Councilor Kretzmann has anything to add, because this is, you know, he had some thoughts on this.
No, I think what you're saying, which I had not thought about it as a sort of first call model, but I think that makes, sorry, is that any better?
No.
Not much.
Is it you guys, not me?
We're just having technical stuff on our end.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me okay, or can you not?
We can very quietly hear you.
We'll be quiet and you talk as loud as you can.
I had not thought of it as a sort of first call, second call model until you said it, but I think that makes a lot of sense that when we get into either committee of the whole or even full council, whatever, to say like, are there any questions? Are there any discussion about any of the departments? Let's start there. Otherwise, sort of unanimous consent, you know, all the other departments are approved might make sense as well.
Yes.
So really, it's what you're also advocating for by default then is that the committees are the place where all substantive conversation needs to take place. And if it doesn't, let's not rehash it in committee of the whole, and certainly not beyond. You can't do it beyond. So.
Correct. I don't know if we want to go there, but we could as a council limit ourselves to resolutions that originate in committee and not have a resolution on the floor process as well.
I think would not go over well, in part just because I think a lot of people need a little bit of time to digest. And if they haven't had a chance to digest it, you know, then they're not going to know that they, are you looking for the full council?
Are we having a joint meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
full
what I
two
think.
chambers.
Yeah.
Oh.
I thought you were just dying to jump in on a rules subcommittee meeting.
We do need to wrap this one up because I think they're using the same Zoom for that meeting. But anyway,
Oh, yeah.
but basically, yeah, I think people are gonna, in some cases, need some time to digest what they've heard in the committee and that kind of thing. So I want to give people the opportunity at the committee of the whole to, you know, do a resolution there. I think, you know, it's always in order until it's done, right? So.
Sure.
No, I think that's right, but I think what Councilor Kretzmann is arguing for is that there's a presumption, I think, that the committee report should have that don't necessarily mean this is a report de novo. It is a, you know, it is a summary if we do that, or even if just say the committee report is there, unless you have an issue, right? It's being reported, and let's go to the things that matter. Because even we were lucky a bit, but we had 2 nights reserved, which I was relieved because I was traveling for extra nights. And so anything we can do to make the far end of this process more efficient.
Yeah. Right, because that's where we're really, you know, 24 plus people in the room, you're really burning resources at a rapid rate.
Yeah.
But all right, so more to come on this topic, I think, although I think we've got a pretty good, you know, indication of where we're going with this one. But again, we'll have one more bite at the apple, so to speak. But with that said, I am going to call it because we got to jump into Zoom or Zap and PF in the chamber. And hopefully we'll see you all there. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, motion adjourned.
Motion
Thank you. Sorry I'm late.
and voted and done.
So John,
Yes, sir.
if you're trying to, at the beginning of the meeting, I'm just going to announce that you're going to take over the conversation.